can't just think about the diet formulation. It's, beyond that. It's not just how it's formulated, but how we mix it, how we deliver it, and then make sure it's available to the cows throughout the day.
Welcome to Rumination Podcast, presented by Jeffo Nutrition. Hi, I'm your host, Chris Gwyn. Maximizing milk component yield on your dairies is the topic for today's discussion. And we're honored to welcome Dr. Heather Dann, president of William H. Miner Agriculture Research Institute in Chazy, New York, and a leading expert in dairy cow nutrition and management. Growing up on a dairy in Western New York, Dr. Dann developed a deep-rooted passion for dairy science early on in age. She pursued this interest academically, earning a Bachelor of Science at Animal Science from Cornell and a Master of Science from Penn State, and further a PhD from the University of Illinois. The Miner Institute today, Dr. Dann's research focuses on optimizing dairy cow nutrition and management to enhance animal health and productivity and farm profitability. Beyond her research, Dr. Dann is dedicated to education and mentorship, actively training undergraduate and postgraduate students through experimental learning programs at the Institute. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Heather Dann to the Rumination Podcast.
Hi, Chris. Thanks very much for inviting me to join you today. I always welcome an opportunity to be able to talk about dairy nutrition and management with anyone that's willing to listen.
Now, we have an active, willing listening ship. And just as a side note, I know your cousin's up here in Ontario as well, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have my grandfather in the 80s actually moved his dairy farm from New York up into Canada because he was really impressed with the ag policies at the time. And since then, my uncles and my cousins have been able to successfully dairy farm up there. So I always enjoy a chance to get over to Wellington County and get to see them and what they're doing.
Yep. I've interacted with them quite a few times over the years. Good people. So back to today's subject. Dr. Dann, you've extensively researched and presented on many topics in dairy cow nutrition and management that influence component yield on dairies. And Heather, I'm wondering, going past the economic value, what can component volume and percentage tell us about the farm level management and cow health?
Yeah, so I think one of the important things that we need to look at is, the pounds or kilos of fat and protein that our farm is producing. And at least here in the Northeast US and in Canada, I know as well that component yields are critically important to the sustainability of farms. And, some of the common metrics that we're currently using here to track, and I think makes sense in the Canadian situation as well, is the kilos or pounds of fat and protein shipped. And, several years ago, we had these targets of about 2.7 kilos, or about 6+ pounds was the target. People were trying to join that. Here in the US, we'd call it the 6-pound club. And because of improvements in, nutrition, management, as well as genetics, many farms now have been easily able to achieve that. And what we're seeing now is those targets or those benchmarks are shifting, and we have many farms, striving for that 3.2 kilos or 7 pounds plus of milk. And we're fortunate here at the Institute that we're at that level and a little above. And it's a really exciting time for the industry, especially as we've been of late seeing a lot of movement in the amount of fat and protein that are being produced on farm.
So that's, as you say, it's an awesome target, and I'm sure in 10 years it'll be even higher. And given that, beyond that economic, that's so key to sustainability of the dairy, what else can this high level of component yield tell us about what's going on from a management perspective or cow health perspective?
Yeah, I think it really gives us a lot of insight into, right, just the general feeding practices and quality of the diet that's being had on farm. And, one of the tools or metrics that we've been using the last several years and have found quite useful is the fatty acid analysis piece that's come into play. So that started in the Northeast, has been more widely accepted in the Midwest, and now a little bit in the Western US. And across the border from us in Quebec and now throughout Canada, Lactanet, from what I understand, is offering some of that information, and they've been doing a great job of pairing that with management practices and understanding how these changes in the de novo mixed and preformed fatty acids can give some insight into management opportunities on farm.
Yeah, and I think that's also being used globally, right? In Europe, I think.
Yeah, in Europe as well. Yep.
Yeah, so key aspect. And are there any particular key metrics related to that, ratios or numbers that you as a nutritionist would want to see on farms?
Yeah, so when we first started, we would put out a number and say, "Oh, we want to see, this number, zero point 0.9 maybe for de novo." And at that time, our fat content, where farms with Holstein cows were happy to be at about 3.8% fat, right? That metric doesn't really hold or work for most farms now. And so what we've done is go back and look at our regression equations, and we use that regression approach. So if you're at a farm that your goal is 4%, then we can tell you, okay, based on the typical population, we might want to see de novo mix and preform at a given level. But most farms today aren't really that happy there, especially in the Canadian situation, right? You're much higher historically than what we've been in the US, but I think we're catching up a bit. And so now farms with 4.5, 4.8% fat, right? We have some different benchmarks. And so it's kind of a sliding scale for what the target is. And that scale is also changing throughout the season. So as we're in summer now, my expectation for our own farm here is that our fat content is going to be a bit lower, maybe a tenth or two tenths than what we might see in the winter time. And so we're adjusting those benchmarks as we go.
So with that in mind, and the kind of a do you have a resource for those benchmarks at Miner that someone could reference to look at those regression equations?
Yeah, so we've talked about them at several different conferences or meetings, but if someone doesn't have access to that information, they can reach out to me at my email at Dan, DANN, at WHMINER.com, and I'd be happy to send them a copy of those guidelines or regression equations.
No, that's brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. So, back to that same topic, what do you see from your own experience or research, the most influential nutritional factors affecting kind of component yield on the dairies?
Yeah, whether it's here or when I'm talking to other farmers, I think one of the most important things that we need to do is make sure we get the diet and that dining experience right to maximize milk components. And to me, that means that we need to focus on diet formulation, but also the management environment in which that diet is delivered to the cows. And so when we look at diets, we're thinking there's some key pieces that we want to make sure we're achieving with diet formulation, right? So when we can, herd size allows using multiple rations to meet the needs of the stage of lactation those cows are in, as well as the parity group. We want to use a blend of carbohydrates with different fermentabilities. So that's going to provide energy to our animals, but at the same time, making sure that we maintain rumen health. We're also looking at the supply of metabolizable protein and essential amino acids. And so, amino acid formulation strategies is really important to maximizing those milk components, both on the fat and protein side. And then we can't forget about, the strategic use of some supplemental fat sources that are not going to inhibit fiber digestion in the rumen. And then we can come in, depending on the farm situation, and target with some feed additives. And so I think those are key things that we focus on. But when I think about the diet in general, I'm thinking about it as kind of a pyramid. And that when we formulate diets for cows to get the most milk out of them, right, the foundation of that pyramid, it really starts with forages and having good forage quality. And so we're spending a lot of time this year for our own herd, focusing on that, making sure that we're putting up the best quality forage as we can. That's been a bit of a challenge this year with the frequent rains that we've had. Um, but we're wanting to get that maturity in, and then when we do get it in, making sure that we're packing those silos, or bunks properly, getting them covered, excluding oxygen, so that we can have the highest quality forage or digestible fiber that we can to position to those cows. And some might say, well, why does this really matter, right? Can't I just feed a little bit more grain and still have some benefits there? And yes, but oftentimes the forages are going to be some of the most economical feeds on our farms. But also, right, the high quality forages are going to let farms be able to, or their cows be able to have higher dry matter intake. The diets are less filling, and that's going to support a higher level of milk production, which is a key component of getting more pounds of or kilos of fat and protein out, right? And so when we can feed more forage, it also helps us have less risk of SARA or subacute ruminal acidosis in the diets, and decrease the risk of milk fat depression. Good quality forages is really going to drive some of the microbial growth in the rumen, and the dead microbes, they serve as an amazing amino acid source for cows. Those amino acids end up in the small intestine and can be used for milk protein synthesis. So we definitely want to be doing those type of things. And then the other piece is that these digestible forages are really going to help us have a supply of acetate for the cows that is really going to drive one of the building blocks of milk fat, the de novo fatty acid synthesis, and right, again, contribute to having better milk components.
Yeah, absolutely. So great forages, put up properly, all the things that people are aware of that is so important to do. And then I just love your coined the phrase, the dining experience. Hopefully you've trademarked that.
Yeah, actually, I
Um,
kind of stole that from Rick Grant, who was
yeah,
president before I was here. But we've done a lot of work together on cow comfort and management, and right, he knows that I steal that. But I think it really, to me, just drives home the point that we can't just think about the diet formulation. It's beyond that. It's not just how it's formulated, but how we mix it, how we deliver it, and then make sure it's available to the cows throughout the day. And uh, yeah, so I kind of equate it to going to a restaurant and I want to have good service. We need to make sure as farmers that we're providing good service to our cows.
yeah. So on that note, yeah, cow comfort management impacts that affect milk component yield in your experience and the research that you've done. Can you
Yeah, I
expand
would
there on
say
that?
some of the work that we've done here at the Institute, as well as, right, the Guelph group is doing great work, and several other places, that really drives home the point to me that we need to maximize, or sorry, focus on optimizing key behaviors of those animals to maximize milk components. And that comes down to, I think, a lot of things we talk about in general is cow comfort. So I'm thinking about the physical environment the cow is in, the social environment, not just with her own cow peers, but also as farmers, how we interact with our animals. And those things, those two, really are going to influence the key behaviors that I think about when I'm trying to set cows up to produce as much fat and protein as they can. So, resting time, rumination time, and feeding time. And if we can get those things right in the cow's daily time budget, then right, she's going to be productive, healthy, and have a good well-being. So some of the work that we've done here, where we've gone out on farms and tried to understand why do some farms have higher fat content than other farms, and we were tying this back into understanding the makeup of the fat, so how much de novo fatty acids or mixed origin or preformed fatty acids are in that milk fat. We found that those herds that we visited, that the farms that had more fat or higher de novo fatty acids, they made sure their diet had enough physical effective fiber. So the physical form of the diet was just as important as the total amount of fiber in the diet. We also saw that they were feeding lower ether extract. Now, I think since we've done that work, we've improved in fine tuning some of the fatty acid composition in that. So it's probably an opportunity to look there. I think the other thing is, right, we're changing some of the Penn State recommendations for where we like to see particle size. And so for us, at our herd, and right, some of the recommendations for corn silage based diets, we're moving some of the material that's traditionally been on the top of that 4 screen system. We're moving that into the second level, or that 8 millimeter screen, and we're seeing nice benefits from that. And in part it's because, right, there's less material for the cows to sort away. They're making sure that they can get that feed. And at least in the US, we have some issues with overstocking, so that we don't want to have excessively long particles that are going to take cows more time to chew or eat. And we want those cows to be able to go eat their meal, then go lay down and ruminate. And so moving some of that material into that 8 millimeter screen has been positive from I think a cow time budget standpoint, but also that's contributed or improved milk components as well.
Yeah, I must say, I commend you on the minor suit on that work. I share it often about when people say how much on the top screen. It's like, well, how about none if it's as long as it's on the second one, right? It makes a big practical difference at the farm level.
Yeah, and I think what really drove home this point to me was that we have some ruminally cannulated cows, and for some of our nutrition research, we will remove the contents, measure the pool sizes, and do some things that are going to generate data to go into modeling information. But what we did during some of these evacuations of the rumen was we fed cows TMR back, and then we caught the bolus as she swallowed it, and what that allowed us to do is look at the particle size of the TMR versus the particle size of the bolus that she just swallowed. And what we found across the different TMRs that we were testing was that she was chewing that material um, to about 8 millimeters or less. So it told us, right, we if we could really influence the time if we have a lot of long particles in that she's going to spend time chewing. And I think the dogma has been that we want to provide long fiber so the cow ruminates. And what we've seen in our work here, as well as some others work with some dry diets as well as some ensiled diets, is that we're not really changing the rumination time for those animals, but we're changing the eating time. And so that's really the kind of some of the simple exercise or the visual that really changed my mind on this particle size distribution.
So cows are able to maintain rumination time
Yep.
and then
They have
for sure production while eating, spending less time eating through the day.
yeah, less time eating, and then they have more time to go and lay down, right? And one of the things that we see, the Guelph group has really shed some light on this, is that we want cows to ruminate. Maybe it's going to be around 600 minutes a day for kind of our average Holstein cow, and but we want to see as much of that time ruminating. Having the cow lay down, and there's some nice work showing that the more time that cow lays down, that has a positive impact on boosting milk fat production for those
And
animals.
certainly the shorter eating time would also assist in barns where maybe it's overstocked as it could be for economic reasons or mixed parity allowing more submissive animals access to the feed that they need.
Yeah. Yep. One of the other things that we found during some of our survey work was that farms that have higher fat content or de novo fat in their milk, that they were feeding their animals more often. So in the freestall situation, cows that were higher in de novo were 5 times more likely to have feed delivered twice a day in the freestall. And this concept applies to the tie stall as well. So we saw in the work that we were doing that about those cows were 11 times more likely to deliver, or those farms were 11 times more likely to deliver the feed 5 times a day in tie stalls. I think what this means is they're probably pushing up feed, or in the farms we were working with at the time, they were probably component feeding. So trying to smooth out some of that slug feeding and provide a better rumen environment. And really, the reason why this feed delivery works is that it's going to motivate cows to eat. It's going to control the meal size so we don't have that slug feeding. And some other work done outside of the Institute would show that, right, cows that are fed 2 times a day versus 1 time a day at TMR, there's less sorting of particles, there's better intake, more milk, eating time increases, which, right, we were talking before, not extending that, but in certain situations, right, there's an optimal or a sweet spot for eating time. It improved rumination, and overall, the take home there for me was that there's healthier rumens. And when we have healthier rumens, we're going to see that there's going to be more de novo fatty acids contributing to milk fat. And so, right, that's going to be a win for the cow's health, but also for the farmer and the milk that they're able to sell.
Yeah. So on that, um, have you or others looked at what's the time spread in delivery of feed? And I ask this because we have, say, producers that have to make 2 batches of feed for that group a day, but they feed them consecutively versus perhaps spraying them out 4 to 6 hours that could still fit in with the total time for feeding and mixing. Just spread things out. Do we need to spread these meals by 4 hours, by 6 hours, 12 hours? Has anybody ever looked at that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Trevor DeVries has done some work with meal delivery times, as well as Kevin Harvatine at Penn State has been doing some work thinking about timing of meal delivery. And the Penn State work is really focused more on trying to understand the circadian rhythms of cows and the timing, and can we take advantage of a different feeding schedule that will allow cows to increase more milk components. And there is some work to that. I think one of the things that needs to be explored further is that if we're going to feed twice a day, should we be changing the diet composition? So I think a lot of people, right, are going to feed the same diet morning and afternoon if they're splitting. But to me, it provides a real opportunity that if I'm going to feed first thing in the morning, and we usually see cows are going to have their largest meal of the day, that maybe suggests to me that maybe we should look at feeding cows maybe a safer or less fermentable diet if they're going to have that big meal. And then if I know they're going to come back in the afternoon or evening and they're going to have smaller meals, then maybe that's an opportunity where I change the fermentability of that TMR. And so I think that's an area that we definitely need to take a closer look at. And I'm not aware of anyone that's really done that well. So if you're aware, I don't know, Chris, you get around and see a lot of farms and talk to a lot of different people. Do you know of anyone that's doing that type of strategy?
I haven't come across that. It's a fascinating hypothesis, and there's a group that have got things right that would probably be interested in doing that, and then there's others that we just got to get feeding consistently first, right?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge, right? That depending on where you are, I think in the U.S. or Canada, there's different philosophies of, is multiple diets a good thing, or does that just make it more of a headache from a SOP standpoint and chance of errors and right, some of the economics of how many loads do you mix and what makes sense on each individual farm.
Yep, got to make sure the dining experience is good first. Yeah, no, that's a fascinating topic, and I look forward for people doing the research and following up with you at some day on that. So, is just that. So, thank you for all that information. It's a wealth and lots of things to follow up on, and just kind of wanted to respect your time and wrap things up. One or two red flags or that might come up if on a diet or how the cows are reacting to that dining experience that you would want people to think about as a precursor to readjusting things?
Yeah, I think one of the kind of flags for me when I'm looking, whether it's our own herd here or milk samples that someone may send into our lab, or I'm reviewing data with a farmer, is looking at the day-to-day variation in fat. So we know that of the milk components, the fat content can be the most variable. And so I see some what I would classify as really well managed farms that fat content is incredibly consistent from day to day. Now, where we have to be a little careful in the interpretation of variation is if it's a smaller farm, maybe all of the cows are always going into the bulk tank. On our larger farms, different pens are going into a tanker. And so, right, we got to be a little aware of what we're interpreting there. But day to day variation is important to look at and can give some insight into things as simple as if you have a relief feeder on the weekend or you take a vacation, you all of a sudden have a change in your milk fat, right? What might be going on there? Things as simple as is the SOP being followed or not, right? I think the other things that I like to look at beyond just day to day variation is the seasonal pattern of milk over the year and look at that year over year. So we know that right in the winter we expect to see higher fat. In the summer we're going to see a little bit of drop, and so we're adjusting our expectations. But year over year, given improvements in nutrition management and genetics, we should be making progress in that and seeing those lines shift up. And so I think that's an important piece. Another one that's pretty simple is looking at the milk urea nitrogen content of the milk and seeing, is there an opportunity to adjust the carbohydrate fractions or the protein fractions. And sometimes this has given us a tool when we see some unusual MUNs, especially variation in MUNs throughout a week, right? That's pointed us to go look at feed push-ups. Our cows running out of feed. So one of those very simple things that we need to do on farm. Uh, and so that can give some insight there. I think, getting away from just the milk composition piece, I think looking at transition cow health problems is another key area. So that if we're not setting those cows up well during the dry period and have them calve in, ready to increase their intake rapidly, as well as right, be able to produce good components. Only our healthy cows are going to do that. So if there's a lot of health problems that are happening, right, farms aren't going to achieve their goals for components, and we need to really evaluate that. And that comes down to looking at formulation strategies, management practices, and then right, fine tuning those diets with certain additives or to support those metabolic challenges that they're going to face during that time period.
No, absolutely. Can't make up from a bad start of lactation. So thanks for emphasizing that. Just as we finalize, any other key take home messages that you'd want a listener to really focus on our last 25 minutes of discussion here?
Yeah, I think, right, I mentioned earlier, but protocol drift is really important. People get bored with routine tasks. And, on our farm, right, that's feeding, that's bedding animals, that's milking them. And we can't forget to make sure that we're going back and reviewing and emphasizing the importance of those activities. Uh, but really, I think for me, the big take home today is that there's a simple recipe to getting more milk fat and protein. And that really comes down to carefully formulated rations, along with great forage quality and feeding management, and then making sure we have good top notch cow management with a real emphasis on those transition cows. And so if you're doing those things, then right, you should be able to get those 3+ kilos of fat and protein that we're all after. And I think we're in a really exciting period of time now for our industry, as that we're seeing many of our best managers and farms being able to achieve very high levels of uh, fat and protein, and exceeding a lot of our expectations that we would have had just a few years ago for what cows are able to do.
No, absolutely. Thank you for summarizing that, and thank you for being part of our discussion today and sharing your knowledge and experience.
Oh, my pleasure.
And I also want to thank your audience for being with us today. And don't forget to subscribe to the Rumination Podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and other platforms. And you can visit us at jeffo.ca to learn more how Jeffo microencapsulated technology will boost component yield. This podcast was brought to you by Jeffo Nutrition, precision for a growing world. Have a great day.